This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
Tonight, we also welcome back our most frequent guest, our most frequent flyer. She is the wife for one of us and the mother of the other. She is our most frequent guest with 12 previous appearances for Pretty Woman, Sleepless in Seattle, When Harry Met Sally, There's Something About Mary, My Fair Lady, Pillow Talk, The Odd Couple, Bringing Up Baby, A Few Good Men, The Revisit, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, Top Gun, Dial M for Murder. Please welcome back my mother, Christine Duncan.
Oh. I think there's a theme with all those movies.
Yes.
Yeah, they tend to be from roughly about the same period of time, the 80s, 90s, save for a few rare examples, and most of them happen to have a romantic element to them.
Yes.
I mean, you have been our so-called romantic comedy expert for years.
I don't know about expert, but it's my favorite genre.
Well, we don't bring you in for the Will Ferrell or Adam Sandler comedies.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we also welcome a new guest to the show. He is the host and creator of the Cinemusts podcast. Please welcome Myke Emal.
Thanks, guys. Glad to be here.
So, Myke, what is Cinemusts about?
Cinemusts is about the hunt for essential movies. We use the great book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, to pull different movies to discuss, vote into a tiered system based on if you recommend them to everybody or some people or nobody, to try to compile the list of the movies truly everybody has to see.
I'm assuming you use the expanded edition that's been updated a couple of times?
We will use any movie that has ever been in any edition. So even movies that have since been cut on frequent editions are still eligible. Thank goodness, because we have lost some real good ones to the recent slew of contemporary stuff. So anything that's ever been in any copy of the book is fair game.
All right. So unfortunately, you are subject to our first time guest questions. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
Okay, I'm worse at this one. I'm game for the other questions, but I am just a regular movie guy. I don't claim to be as much a cinephile, even though I'm wearing an Akira Kurosawa shirt. I am a teacher. I teach junior high English. I obviously love movies, but I have many nerdy passions. I'm an avid board gamer. Try to be as good a reader as I can. I pick up a guitar once every 6 months. So I try, I dabble in a couple of different hobbies. Movies are probably my most long-standing hobby. I fell in love with them as a kid. Love the escapism, the worlds that they offer. And I'm always just on the hunt for like the next great movie that blows my mind, which was kind of a bit of why I started Cinemusts, is because I haven't nearly gone through even half of that book, and I'm always on the hunt for like what's the next one that's really just gonna rock my world, because I chase that experience every time I put on a new movie.
Yeah, I would imagine being an avid reader and your job being an English teacher go hand in hand.
Sometimes, you'd think I'd read more.
Hey, I won't hold it against you. It's been a long time since I picked up a book.
I appreciate it.
I tend to be more of the audiobook crowd anymore.
Same.
So, question number 2, the dreaded second question. What is your favorite movie and why?
See, I don't dread this one because I just have an answer in the can, but my favorite movie is Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's kind of, it's twofold. Like, it's a nostalgic pick. I've loved it since I was a kid. It's stayed with me that long, but it's, I don't know if I'm like allowed to kind of step on your feet here, Tom, and answer question 3 at the same time. Is that allowed?
Go right ahead. I'll just say what question 3 is here. What makes a good movie for you? Go right ahead. Mix, match, however you want.
So I kind of mentioned that primarily for me, movies are an escapism route. They're a way to get different experiences than, what I can kind of get in my day-to-day life. And so Raiders offers that in spades. It's an adventure movie. It's about going to exotic locales and following an adventuresome guy who can always make the best of a crappy situation. But, I think what makes a movie good for me in general is that I'm on board for a movie that can establish its own rules and kind of lay out what it's going for in about the first 10 or 15 minutes. And then if it can play fair by that or up the ante, I'm in. So that kind of keeps me from being pigeonholed. I try not to say like, I don't do this genre. I like to give everything a fair shake. So, Raiders, rolls with this premise. I think another reason it's my favorite is like, I feel the pressure sometimes of my favorite movie needs to be something really profound or saying something about contemporary issues. And I get into this web of like, well, what's the contemporary issue I want to like most be engaged with and known for? And to me, Raiders kind of cuts the problem, because Raiders is not a deeply profound movie. It's just a great movie. It's a simple good versus evil story. It's action packed. It's funny. Every element of filmmaking craft, I think, is on full display, but it doesn't take itself too seriously either. It was made relatively on the fly, fast, cheap, kind of dirty, and everything just kind of came together for it. So it's just a blast. I consider it a pretty near perfect movie. And I think if I've read the list right, it's done pretty well on your guys' rankings, which makes me pretty happy.
It's comfortably inside the top 10 and has been for a while. It was our first episode ever of the show, and we've revisited it at least once. We probably might revisit it again at some point. But you have a producer at the top of his game in George Lucas, a director who's at the top of his game, probably in his peak in Spielberg, a leading man who has obviously gone on to much bigger things, but is there a more iconic character than him leading as Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford? And you have one of the great screenwriters of all time just starting his journey on his second film in Lawrence Kasdan. It is a cacophony of everybody being at the right place at the right time, all meeting at their peak moments. And I don't know if I would agree that it's not a profound film. The Wonders of God Are Not Made for Fascists seems like a great lesson for me.
I like it.
So thank you for sitting through our questions. You answered it a lot better than most as far as best film or favorite film.
I'm excited to be here.
But let's get into the rest of our evening here. Tonight, for our 229th episode, we revisit the courtroom classic, Anatomy of a Murder. Directed by Otto Preminger, written by Wendell Mays, music by Duke Ellington, the famous Duke Ellington. Starring James Stewart as Paul Biegler, Lee Remick as Laura Manion, Ben Gazzara as Lieutenant Frederick Manion, Arthur O'Connell as Parnell McCarthy, Eve Arden as Maida Rutledge, Catherine Grant as Mary Pallant, George C. Scott as Claude Dancer, Orson Bean as Dr. Matthew Smith, Russ Brown as George Lemon, Murray Hamilton as Alphonse Paquette. Dad, what is Murray Hamilton more famous for?
Jaws.
Yes, he is the mayor from Jaws.
Yes.
Brooks West as Mitch Lodwick, or as he affectionately became known in our household over the last 2 evenings, the Boob District Attorney. Ken Lynch as Sergeant James Durgo. Recognition for this movie? Based on a book of the same name, Anatomy of a Murder was released on July 2nd, 1959, making this... Boy, of course, now I got to do the math in my head here just for a moment. I think this is the 65th anniversary this year.
Okay, I was born 4 years afterwards. I'm 60, so yes, 65.
Okay. On a budget of roughly $2 million, it is estimated to have grossed $8 million during its theatrical run. Upon its release, Mayor Daley of Chicago temporarily banned the film in the heavily Catholic city. Preminger filed a motion in federal court in Illinois, and the mayor's decision was overturned. The film was allowed to be exhibited after the court determined that the clinical language during the trial was realistic and appropriate within the film's context. Seems rather quaint to me at this point, but we'll get to that later.
Quaint, especially after 1968, Mayor Daley.
Well, when they're
Lord,
making
gotta
such a
love
big
him.
deal out of the word panties, that just, like,
Yeah.
that's said in commercials anymore. Anyway.
I know.
And-
Some of the words he was mouthing on the floor of the Democratic Convention 9 years later.
Anatomy of a Murder would go on to receive 7 nominations at the Academy Awards for 1959 for Best Picture, Actor for James Stewart, Supporting Actor for Arthur O'Connell and George C. Scott, Screenplay for Wendell Mays, Cinematography, and Film Editing. In 1989, the American Bar Association rated this as one of the 12 best trial films of all time, and it was listed as the number 4 on the 25 greatest legal movies as well. Anatomy of a Murder has been honored by the AFI on the following lists. AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, it was a nominated film. For AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills, it was also nominated. For AFI's 100 Years of Film Scores, it was a nominated film score. And for AFI's 10 Top 10, it was the number 7 courtroom drama film of all time. In 2012, Anatomy of a Murder was added to the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress. Anatomy of a Murder currently holds a 100% rating among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, very rare, a 95 score on Metacritic, and a 4.2 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we begin each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
This is a film that I always had heard about and I never had an opportunity to see until I would assume it's got to be about a decade, maybe a little longer ago. And needless to say that I was taken by its accuracy and realism.
So I think this was one, I know famously on this show that I have said that I've watched every Best Picture winner, not nominee, that I'm still working on. It'll probably take me a lot longer than the winners. But every Best Picture winner and every AFI Top 100 film from both of the lists. Now, this was not included on either of the AFI Top 100, but once I finished both of those projects, I started to focus in on other things that I could do to have like certain movie completion goals. And the AFI 10 Top 10 list became one of those goals. So this was one of the films that I watched kind of ticking off all the courtroom drama movies because those are an easy one for me to kind of go to. And I think I watched this maybe 5-6 years ago. I think I watched it again during the pandemic. And for whatever reason, earlier this year, I have a playlist on a particular app of movies that are just like go-to favorites of mine, ones I can put on in the background and work to. You just need kind of a background noise type of thing. And this movie just happened to come on and when I pressed the shuffle button. And I was glad that it did. So I played it. And then it came up again later this year when somebody in my film discussion group from Madison decided that he wanted to cover this film. So that obviously worked out. And now we're discussing it yet again. So this is, oddly enough, the third time this year that I will have seen this film. And each time I'm still captivated by how good the film is, how charismatic, and how 2.5 hours seems to fly by. Mom, was this your first time watching it?
I think so. I don't remember ever having seen it. I love James Stewart, so I think I would have remembered this film, and I would definitely watch it again in a heartbeat. I think there was things that I missed first time through. So I was reviewing and trying to look for my quotes and my scenes, and there were a few things I scratched my head and go, I'm not sure I remember too much about that particular scene. I think it would have been good had I watched it once again. But yeah, so this was my first time, and I thoroughly enjoyed the film.
Myke, had you seen it before?
Yeah, this is I think third time for me. I came to it same through the AFI 10 Top 10. I remember watching that when it was broadcast, and I miss the AFI things. I wish they would do another anniversary edition of that big 100 list. I've been waiting for that. But yeah, it got on my radar through that. So when that list was first published, I'd watched it. I bought it again when I started collecting Criterion Collection Blu-rays. I snagged this one, watched it then, and now this is time number 3. I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. I'm a gigantic James Stewart fan, so like that is all you have to say to get me to watch a movie is that he's in it. It's like he can be in it for 30 seconds. I'll still watch the movie. So yeah, I really love it.
So I think it must bug you then that this lost to Ben-Hur for 1959.
Yeah. So you graciously you'd offered me options between two shows, and I could come on for Ben-Hur, I could do this, and I think what I said to you was like, well, you can either hear me talk about how much I love James Stewart, or you can hear me talk about how much I hate Charlton Heston, and you decided to go with the positive thing.
Yeah, we respond more positively to film thoughts than, often negatively. I will say there are films that I've definitely decried, but that's because I have to cover all of these. But it's easier when people love things as opposed to just outright hating them.
And hate's a strong word. I shouldn't say I hate. I the appeal, I just don't see it. But in fairness, we did an episode on Planet of the Apes. I was kind on Charlton Heston, especially as a guy who got that movie made. Like, props to him.
And I think we've only covered him once to this point. I know we have Ben-Hur coming up later this year, but I think we only covered him in Touch of Evil so far, Pop.
Right.
I can't think of anything else that's on our list currently, but
Nope.
That's all right. I'm sure we'll get to Planet of the Apes as well at some point.
Hopefully.
So what is the film actually about? Anybody want to take a first stab? No pun intended.
Okay, so I think it is a sort of a cynical look at American courtroom dramas and our judicial system, and how the legal system works in both the favor of a plaintiff and against the plaintiff. And that if, however bad it is, you have a good enough attorney, you can probably get yourself off of any sort of charges just by creating a believable story and having enough backup information. And having seen it firsthand, in our family, and I think it's disappointing to me that the way the film ends, that he actually is guilty, but I think that's part of that whole cynical look at our judicial system.
He wasn't guilty. He was acquitted. That's the only thing you need to worry about.
Okay.
So all I heard from you, Mom, was lawyers matter.
Well, if you're in trouble, they do matter.
Most people tend not to think so, but anyway.
So they need one.
Yeah, that's very true.
So,
Mike, do you have a theory on the film?
Yeah, well, to me, the movie is about the power of language and the power of the story. And, I was thinking a lot about how it applied to my job that, I work with junior high kids who, sometimes my class is the worst part of their day because it's like, we're going to read a book or, they don't see the point. And, the movie to me is this point that everybody fabricates an image, a story. You need the correct arrangement of language, of attitude, of manners to get what you want. And, tying that in, that also can manipulate things on an incredibly profound level, literally life and death.
Well, if you were doing a closing argument, considering this is a trial movie, it's the long quote from Parnell Emmett McCarthy. 12 men go off into a jury, or 12 people, go off into a jury. 12 different minds, 12 different hearts, from 12 different walks of life, 12 sets of eyes, ears, shapes, and sizes. And these 12 people are asked to judge another human being as different from them as they are from each other. And in their judgment, they must become of one mind, unanimous. It's one of the miracles of man's disorganized soul that they can do it. And in most instances, do it right. Well, God bless juries.
So I came down as a slightly different version of this. Much like our episode last week on the Shawshank Redemption, I do think that a lot of this movie is about the redemption of different people within the film. So for Paul Biegler, he gets a second chance at a law career. For Parnell, he stops drinking, cleans himself up, and gets a chance to do something he's never really dreamed of. For Maida, she's likely to finally get paid at some point. We just don't know when.
And not have fish in the refrigerator?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe. Laura gets redeemed because she's no longer somebody who's faking a rape story, and she gets kind of satisfaction that her cause within the whole thing, her justice is restored within the course of the film. And I would also say, obviously, Lieutenant Manion gets redeemed because he gets acquitted of the charge itself. So maybe they're family in total. But I think there are a lot of people outside of maybe George C. Scott that basically get redemption in this.
He's a prosecutor. He doesn't need to be redeemed.
I don't think he's looking for it either. So then, Dad, what is the one mistake no trial lawyer should ever make?
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
And where was that in this film?
Oh,
Spoiler warning.
Yes,
Spoiler
the
warning.
defining moment when Dancer asks if she's been carrying on with what she then discloses to be her father.
Ah, yes. No loose cannons.
Never do it. Don't go there.
So, as the only technical attorney in the room, even though three of us work in the practice, how accurate are the legal portions of this film?
Very accurate. We'll talk about the one scene where he's interviewing Manion, and quite frankly, I've used the same type of thing, which is I go through the law and I tell them, I don't care what the facts are. Okay, there's what I can prove, what the state can prove, and what the jury believes, and nothing matches. So, if you want to confess, go see a priest. If you want me to handle your case, you answer the questions I ask, and nothing more. Because if you offer evidence that I don't find in records, then I can't use that in building a defense. But if there are gaps, I can certainly imply.
And there's your cynical take of the week.
Yeah, well, that's how it works.
So, when I said earlier this year that this was one of the most legally accurate films, and you said, and hemmed and hawed and whatever else. So you're saying I was right?
Yes, it's been this. I hadn't seen it in a while, but yes, it is. The only thing I can say is that there's no way you would get away with all of the questions about what she was wearing and all the rest of that because of what's, the laws changed. It's called the Rape Shield Law. It's now enacted in every state and jurisdiction in this country. It's like it should have been adopted a long time ago, which is no matter how a woman acts, she's not asking to be raped. It's ridiculous. I can't believe even in that more Neanderthal time, we were allowing that crap.
What are you talking about? We were having members of Congress argue over that and the need for, what was it, the Assault of Women's Act or something to that effect like 10 years ago? Not even 15?
It's ridiculous.
So as the self-proclaimed favorite Jimmy Stewart lover on the episode, where does Paul Biegler rank among characters for you, Mike, among his performances?
Oh, it's kind of tough to place because I don't know if it's like a Mount Rushmore situation. I don't think he makes it, but I'm a big fan of the darker Jimmy Stewart, the one that's not the public image, not the aw shucks guy that, I think he's always unfairly pigeonholed into that image. I think even in some of the roles you think of him in, like George Bailey, have a lot more complexity to him. But, it's really nice to see these roles where he kind of is a true to form, like pretty world weary guy, pretty cynical, that he's not just doing the George Bailey thing. And, he kind of veered more towards that in his post-war career, and a lot of the Anthony Mann Westerns would bring that out. So in terms of, that side of him, Paul Biegler's got to be up there, but I still think in terms of, what's his character's name in Philadelphia Story? Is it Mike McCready? I think that one would trump it. George Bailey, obviously.
Okay.
I'm a big Winchester 73 guy.
Great.
So
film.
it's tough when you're talking about one of the greats and he was just hitting home run after home run after home run. this is good. It's doesn't maybe make my top 4 or 5, but like that shouldn't be held against what he does here.
I personally hold this above Mr. Smith because Mr. Smith has such a almost naivete to the movie anymore that it's hard to take that completely seriously, at least for me. I would probably put, maybe this is just becoming a favorites list, but yeah, I think it would be hard to separate him from like George Bailey, of course. I do love him in Rope, but I think that one would probably be forced out. So then you're looking at Rear Window, you're looking at potentially Vertigo. Liberty Valance is probably up there as well. I mean, he's got so many good characters. It's hard to say what are his top 4 or 5, but I think this would be very close to that like 4 or 5 spot for me.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Well, I haven't seen every single film, and some of them I know I've seen, but I don't necessarily remember everything about them, as we've discussed previously. I think his acting in this and Rear Window come pretty close. I don't know. I think George Bailey is first, but these two have got to be 2 and 3 or both tied for second. I think he does an excellent job of being a serious actor. He played a country bumpkin, but yet when it came time to be in the courtroom, he didn't act like a country bumpkin. He knew his stuff. And you see a softer side in him, like you do in some of his other characters, with how he treats his friend Parnell. And as opposed to the softer side, when he's trying to deal with, trying to think of the actor, Grace Kelly, in Rear Window. He does soften a little bit, especially toward the end of the movie. So you get him playing the serious but soft character as well. He did have a human side to him. So I thought that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of a different role for him to be kind of the smartest guy in the room, but he always seems to have an angle. It's one of the very few roles that I really feel like he has a handle on everything at every point in the movie, almost like a con artist, that he can get one up on everybody that he's around.
You're not going to add Greatest Show on Earth to the list of iconic roles?
What was it, like Bubbles the Clown or something?
Yeah. Yeah. I still want to know why
now
the
you
hell
just
he was
named the
in it.
other Charlton Heston movie we forgot we did on the show.
That's right, we did do that one. It's one I want to forget.
Well, you can very easily. I think it's our shortest episode at like 29 minutes. You did not have anything to say on that movie.
It was when I was a little kid, and it was one of my favorites because it was about the circus and the circus train and circus people, and now I watch it and I'm going, boy, I was a stupid kid. But anyway,
we've all had those movies from childhood that we look back on and we're like, why the hell did I like this? That's why I try not to watch many movies from my youth anymore. Dad, did you have a top 4 or 5 of Stewart performances?
it's not considered or thought about a lot, but I would have to put The Man Who Knew Too Much into that level because he was the glue for that film. Everything revolved around him, and he had to be so many things at so many times and have to deal with so much, and to be, I love that performance by him in that. It's a Wonderful Life, Winchester, called Northside 555.
777.
777. Okay, my mistake. Is another great performance of him. So I'd be hard pressed to come up with just 5. Liberty Valance, even though him playing a young lawyer. Ooh, no. Still, it was a great performance.
I mean, there are plenty of people in their 60s still trying to play a young lawyer.
Yeah, fuck you.
Oh, that was so set up. It was right there.
I know.
So no Harvey fans on this particular episode?
I think he's good. I think there's a lot, to ask an actor to imagine you're acting a opposite a giant rabbit. So like that would be maybe on the short list. Another one I'd throw out is Destry Rides Again, just being like the pacifist gunslinger. I eat that crap up.
Boy, I mean, there's several that I haven't seen, like going back to 27 when he did Seventh Heaven yet. That was like the first Oscars. I also haven't seen Spirit of St. Louis yet either. So, I mean, that one could possibly begin there, but he's just got so many different roles.
I liked him in the Glenn Miller story.
Sure.
I forgot about that one.
Obviously a very prolific actor. Back in the days when you were making 4 movies a year or you basically had no career. So, Dad, are you ready to dig into this a little bit further? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. Anatomy of a Murder is a gripping courtroom drama that follows the defense of Lieutenant Frederick Manion, Ben Gazzara, who was accused of murdering a local bar owner. Manion claims the killing was in revenge for the alleged rape of his wife, Laura Lee Remick. Defense attorney Paul Biegler, James Stewart, takes on the case, navigating an intense legal battle filled with moral ambiguity, unreliable testimonies, and psychological intricacies. The film explores themes of justice, truth, and the complexity of human nature, leaving the audience questioning the true nature of guilt and innocence.
Thank you. Did you know? Part of the controversy surrounding this movie was because it included use of the words bitch, contraceptive, panties, penetration, rape, slut, and sperm. I don't know, that just sounds like maybe any Scorsese movie?
Well, let's just put it up. I remember James Stewart being on Carson, and his dad wouldn't speak to him for like 3 months when he went to see the movie.
Just
Yeah.
Hold.
Okay.
Did you know? In another federal lawsuit in Chicago, the daughter of the real-life murder victim from the 1952 case sued Dell Publishing and Columbia Pictures in July 1960 for libel over accusations that the book and movie, quote, followed the actual trial too closely and portrayed the two women in an unflattering light. The suit was dismissed less than a year later in May 1961. Did you know? Otto Preminger sued Columbia Pictures and its TV subsidiary, Screen Gems, when it sold this film in a package of 60 films to television for $10 million. In New York, ABC interrupted the 160-minute film 13 times with 36 commercials. Preminger was furious that his film was being mutilated and took them to court in a highly publicized case. He lost. Did you know? James Stewart's father was so offended by the film, which he deemed a dirty picture, that he took out an ad in his local newspaper telling people not to see it. Did you know? The interior of Barney Quill's bar is not a movie set. It's the interior of the Thunder Bay Inn Tavern in Big Bay, Michigan. It is approximately 325 yards down the road from the Lumberjack Tavern, where the actual murder, on which the novel and film are based, took place in 1952. Did you know? The law library in the courthouse was actually filmed in the Carnegie Public Library in Ishpeming, Michigan. I hope I got that right.
It's Ishpeming.
Ishpeming?
Mm-hmm. Okay. We have clients there. I asked him once how to say it.
The door that was opened in the courthouse, which is in Marquette, was the door to the men's restroom. The movie was filmed on location in Marquette County, Michigan. And with that, we will take our first break, and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 230th episode, we welcome new guest, Jalen Salah Salman of In Session Film to discuss a controversial comic book film, Joker from 2019, written and directed by Todd Phillips with Scott Silver, music by Hildur Guthnadottir, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Robert De Niro, and Zazie Beetz. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Before we get back into the regular portion of the show, Myke, what's going on over at Cinemusts?
Well, we're a real hobby podcast, so we don't have what I call a regular posting schedule. But what was just recorded, an episode we teased, we do occasionally do the special episodes we deem our Essentials series. We have one out at the beginning of the year on the Essential Best Picture Losers we did with Kieran B. and Adam St. John. And coming up here, my friends Fish and Jeff Crisp, we talked about essential non-Disney animated movies. Speaking of going back to movies you liked in childhood that weren't super great. So that'll be hitting the airwaves soon. And then, regular scheduled Cinemusts will kind of be coming out. We're going to try to do something horror related in October that has not quite been pinned down yet. Later in the year, we'll also be having shows on Inside Llewyn Davis and Children of Men. Those are coming for sure before the year is out.
Excellent choices. Mom, do you have anything to promote, or you good?
I'm okay.
No new books, no new websites, no lecture series.
No.
You're just doing your own thing? Do you have any new baked goods you want to advertise?
I make the best cinnamon scones in the whole world, right?
Well, I wouldn't say. They're better than anything I've tried to this point, but I haven't tasted all of them.
And I make a pretty mean loaf of sourdough.
Yes, you do have a very good recipe for bread goo. And without further ado, it is time for everyone's favorite Ask Dana Anything. We have no submissions from the outside audience, so we are unfortunately relying once again on our guests if they have anything they would like to know about my co-host.
Since we're doing courtroom dramas, Dana, what's your favorite courtroom drama?
Probably A Few Good Men.
Okay.
Because just nailing Nicholson alone is worth watching.
Especially since I don't care for him.
Well, I talked with him yesterday, and he doesn't care for you either.
Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't.
He probably doesn't even notice who's there anymore. Well, thank you, Mom, for that question. Any other questions from our guests?
I brought 3, all related to our film tonight, if that's cool. Okay. I can whittle them down.
Sure, no, go ahead.
Okay, first question. What's the best kind of beer to feed a dog?
Do you like the dog?
Oh my.
Yeah, you like the dog. It's an amazing dog. It can operate a flashlight. It's going to look out for you. It's a great dog.
Dogs love sweets. So I would say a nice Scottish ale.
Okay, question 2. The movie teaches us that a surefire way to end matrimonial bliss is to indulge either in juke joints or pinball machines. What are other things you need to avoid if you want to ensure a lasting relationship?
Since he's been married for 30, how many years?
Hotel rooms?
Big 3.
Well, should I add a qualifier? Is it all hotel rooms ever, or is it just hotel rooms with other people?
Hotel rooms with other people, yes.
Okay.
Okay. And last one, we can cut this if it's going to rock boats too much, but is there ever anything your son has done that you would take a full-page ad out to decry his actions?
Oh, boy. Which bet was it that he had to wear the sandwich board?
Well, that was the one where I said that the Devil Rays had a good chance of making the playoffs, and they ended up in the World Series that year.
That was not the one where it was the sandwich board. That was a much different bet that we will not describe the results of.
I think I know which one it was.
Yes, it involved shaving.
I thought it was the one about the statistics class.
No, it was whether or not the 2011 Brewers would make the playoffs. That was the sandwich board one. Because, as I put it at the time, I get a win-win. Either the Brewers make the playoffs and I have to pay up, or they lose and then Dad has to win. So no matter what happens, I win.
For the most part, no. At least not yet.
That was all
But
I
I
had.
do appreciate you asking such a question with both of my parents on.
I like
Now,
to keep it real.
on the other foot, Mom, is there anything that I have done that requires you to take out a full-page ad decrying my actions? I think this is an easier question. You have much more to complain about, apparently, than Dad does.
Well, I don't know about complaining about. I guess it could be something that was funny that I should, broadcast all over.
That's not the point of the question.
Well, it was pretty close to putting a full-page ad about running through the solid oak door.
Yeah, now that was,
Do we give context to that story?
I'd appreciate it.
Okay, so
I'm imagining all sorts of stuff over here.
my littlest sister, who, well, with all little sisters, you have your moments of contention with sibling rivalry and whatever. Just to screw with her, because I am a psychological torturer of all people near me, went through a phase where I would just screw with her for the sake of screwing with her. And I guess it's not such a phase because I still continue to do it. Regardless, what was it? She was watching some show in the basement or something. And I came over and the remote was loose. And so I grabbed it and changed the channel and then put the remote underneath myself so that she couldn't get to it, just to screw with her. She takes to climbing on my back and then digging her nails into my face. Well, I didn't take too kindly to the second part of that. The one thing I kind of expected, the nails kind of, when anything gets into my face, it gets a little, I start seeing red. So she, how to describe it? She eventually gets fought off by me. And in her pettiness, I allow myself the time to kind of calm down. I had already been pretty steamed up, but essentially I took the remote away and eventually changed it to something that I wanted because I was angry at her by that point for digging into my face. She takes a small nail file case and with probably the best throw she will ever have in her life, underhand tosses this. And as I'm laying on the couch, it hits me in the head. So all I think at that point, because I have not completely calmed down, is I am going to tackle you and beat the ever-living tar out of you. Well, she's taking off down a hallway. And at the end of this hallway is a door, a solid oak door. And she gets to it just a second or two before I am able to get to it. Now, I, in my younger days, played fullback and defensive tackle in football. The door was not going to stop me. I put a shoulder down and tore through that sumbitch like it was butter, and it was barely there. Well, there are very few instances where I actually legitimately thought my father might kill me. That was one of them. The vein in his forehead was so protruding.
Off the basement. We had just finished off 3 weeks before. And this had been a newly installed stained door. He destroyed the door jamb. He damaged the door.
No. I shattered the door jamb. It was in half.
That was about the full page right there.
Yeah.
Well, consider this the full page.
As he is
impressive.
Yes, he is, as he is noted on numerous occasions. In crises, I tend to be, what's the term you used?
Unsettlingly calm.
Yes. It takes a lot to get me to that level of anger.
No, it doesn't. No. it is very easy to trigger you in certain ways. First off, I know all of your buttons. But second, you only have to be a customer service agent with a foreign accent. It doesn't even need to be like outside the United States. Just a southern drawl and referred to you as Mrs. Dana Duncan twice. The first time, you will get a little perturbed. By the second time, you're about ready to throw the phone through the wall.
Or how about the FedEx man? I think you missed that, Tom. We have a new FedEx guy at the office, and he keeps delivering the packages to the private entrances instead of the front. And your dad has called him some nice things in front of the door and behind the door.
I did not use profanity, but names like moron, idiot, dumbass were utilized.
And when was there no profanity used there?
I'm chasing the truck out, going, no. You get back here and you take those packages and you put them where they're supposed to be.
It's just last week.
Also, you are not unsettlingly calm when you're in traffic. You are one of the worst perpetrators.
Road rage.
Yes. You get very upset very easily by anybody going like 5 miles under the speed limit. But thank you to both of our guests for all of your questions. We appreciate it. We can at least continue on this segment for 1 week further. All right. Let's move to best performance, which is where we left off. Dad, who did you have down?
James Stewart.
I concur.
Me too. I don't think there's any question.
Myke, is it 4 for 4?
It's not 4 for 4. He's my secondary. I'm giving this to Otto Preminger.
I was very close. There are a lot of really good framed shots, particularly in the courtroom, that given it's a live setting and not a set, that you had to go to, I think, some extreme lengths to do. But there are so many good individual performances in this. It's hard to recognize everybody. I thought one person might say something about Preminger, so I kind of defaulted to Stewart, partially because I think he is effervescent in this movie. He is radiating, again, the ooze of, I'm the smartest guy in the room. And he has this character almost intrinsically nailed, to the point that you wonder if this is Stewart playing a character or just he's being himself.
I had Preminger second.
See, and I have James Stewart second, so I think maybe we just flip-flopped. For me, where I gave the edge is just in a courtroom drama, you're working with tried and true tropes, and there's only so many ways to shoot a trial, shoot a courtroom, and so just some of the choices that were made, and trying to think about what makes Anatomy of a Murder one of the best, and how does it set itself apart. And what you were saying, just like the blocking, I was really fascinated with. But I think also this idea, to go back to your kind of what the movie's about quote, Dana, with the jury, that so much is laid in the story on what the jury can believe, or how does a jury disregard what it's here. Like, it's all about the jury, and yet we don't see them a lot. And it kind of took me most of the way through the movie to realize, like, it's Preminger's kind of made it us, that we don't have these long-standing shots in the jury box, because he's making us the jury, and he's getting us where the action needs to be. So his use of his wide shots, and when he comes in close, and even just the really procedural nature of in a movie that's almost 3 hours long, and a majority of it being the trial, and kind of putting you in that zone that there is a lot of really dramatic things happening. There's a lot of performance happening in both a meta context and outside of it. I don't know. It just felt like there was such this fresh commentary on how the trial system works, the judicial system, this being from an outsider, that I kind of just had to give it props that he really did pull off something that does feel really unique and doesn't feel like a knockoff of just most other courtroom dramas you've seen before or after.
Mom, why did you have Stewart?
He is so smooth, and he's so suave, and he just exudes character. I think he just has a commanding presence in the film, and it's effortless. It's absolutely effortless. And if you are watching, well, kind of like Myke said, he makes us the jury. So you're watching intently what's happening inside the courtroom. And his statements and how he acts just seems so real that it's hard to separate him from truth, if you want to, from what's actually the drama.
I had Stewart just because he becomes the lawyer. I mean, there's no part of him that's not believable. He knew exactly how to react, how to behave. There's just so much of this that is representative of all the trial lawyers I've known over the 36 years of my career.
All right, secondary performance. I mean, Myke already said that he had James Stewart. So, Myke, what about James Stewart is secondary worthy?
I think I would just crib everything you guys have said, that like he is astounding in the movie. And again, like it is an older, wiser, more world-weary James Stewart. It's a very unique spin on his screen persona. He carries the movie. You know, he's in basically every scene. He's your through line. I really love what he does. We'll talk about when we get into, you know, our scene picks, that there's the Paul Biegler in the courtroom, and that's a performance, that's a character versus, you know, who Paul Biegler really is and how he pulls that off. So like he definitely deserves so much praise. I gave the edge a little bit to Preminger. One, because I just didn't want to come off as too fanboy about how amazing James Stewart is, but also just, you know, the technical aspects of such a, you know, a big, ambitious film. But, you know, Stewart's just astounding.
Dad, you had Preminger as your secondary. Why?
Preminger did a fantastic job of keeping pace. The timing was great. It didn't lapse in any moment in the film where you're kind of bored. And he showed all aspects: the pre-hearing, the preparation, the trial itself, the intricacies, the strategy, etc., without ever showing the mundane or boring aspects of law. Because, I mean, for every hour you're in trial, you're generally spending an hour and a half, 2 hours, maybe even 3, depending on the complexity, preparing for the trial. And so he made it clear by how he interviewed how the interview of the witnesses was done and such, that there was more going on to the story than what you saw before your eyes. And it's hard to do that through the lens of a camera.
Mom, who was your best secondary?
Maybe it's just because I like her charm, but I picked the Maida Rutledge character, Eve Arden. I just think she's just class, and her snippy little comments made me giggle. And I love the line where, you know, he can't stop until she gets paid, and she's the one that finds the fish. I mean, I'm sure that there was not fish in there, but I can only imagine opening up a refrigerator full of fish like that. They only last a couple of days and they stink after 10 minutes inside the refrigerator. But just her little, I don't know, the way she carried herself was amazing. And like I said, she's full of charm and she's the perfect person for this role. So she was my secondary.
You are very much your mother's daughter. She said almost the exact same thing, and I'm like, of course you did. Because it's basically the Thelma Ritter role in this movie.
And I loved Thelma Ritter.
I know.
Well, Eve Arden was known for my generation as being Madge, who had everybody soaking their fingers in palm olive. Yes, but before that, she was had a very successful radio show, and at one point in time was Danny Kaye's paramour. He had a long-term, multiple-year affair with her, almost broke up his marriage.
So I'm going to go off the beaten path and talk about somebody that we haven't mentioned yet to this point, but I think the script writing in this is exceptional. Wendell Mays creates a really great script that's witty, that goes through all the legal aspects and keeps them very realistic, that adapts what's actually a real trial and a real book into something that's a lot more. And he takes all of these elements and is able to still find a lot of humor in a very serious subject. This could have been a very dry, very difficult and serious movie, and that would have taken off a lot of different courtroom dramas up to that point, and probably since. But this isn't that kind of movie. Despite the crime, you still need a certain depthness of lightness that is capable of at least keeping you entertained throughout the course of the movie. And I think that the script aids a lot into that, especially when we're going to get to lines coming up. Most charismatic, I have Arthur O'Connell for Parnell. Did anybody else have him?
I thought about it. He's a longtime character actor, so I mean, recognizing him on all kinds of shows through the 50s or 60s, 70s, even to the early, but no, I did not.
So I specifically had him because I think he's the most easily likable character, despite his kind of inability to lay off the drink, if you will. He just seems lovable, and part of it has to do with how Biegler talks about him. But he just has this affable quality to how he smiles, how he thinks about things. You want him to succeed almost in a way that nobody else does. Everybody else, save for maybe Paul and Maida, gives you a reason to doubt them, or gives you kind of like a cynical viewpoint of them at some point. Obviously, Lieutenant Manion and his wife, they're not wholesome characters individually. They've got clearly a lot of other issues involving them. So to me, it's going to be one of those three as a charismatic, even though I think Lee Remick is, gorgeous in this movie. I go with Arthur O'Connell.
And I have Lee Remick. I think because she's trying to play somebody who is subtly alluring and very believable, that she could have gotten herself into the situation if you believe that sort of, can occur. And the fact that she was the second choice for this film was interesting as well. I don't know if you read about that, but Lana Turner was actually chosen to play the role. And in my homework, I saw that she decided to turn it down because they would not let her wear her custom gowns by her designer. And so they offered it then to Lee Remick. And she was offered the part of the daughter, Mary
Plant.
Mary Plant. And she didn't want that. She either wanted the lead role or she wasn't going to do anything. So they said, well, they'd already offered it to Lana Turner. And then they called her back and said she had the lead role, and she didn't believe them at first. So I think that she knew in her mind what she wanted to do with this role, and she just exuded sex appeal in a movie and in an era where that wasn't, for a typical woman, a good idea.
You having trouble with your hearing aids there, Ma?
Yeah, not my hearing aids. My headset, my ears are tiny and they keep coming out. They just fall out.
Oh, do you bait and fall for his tactics every time?
Like I said, equal opportunity annoyer.
Yeah, well.
Wouldn't Lana Turner been too old for that part?
I don't know. It's not really distinct at what her age actually is, I guess.
Mm-mm.
I would guess that somewhere in their 20s, but like Ben Gazzara's got to be in his 30s playing a 28-year-old, I think.
Yeah, but he's got a young-looking face, and with his hair slicked back like that, which was the style of the time, you can imagine that he's younger than probably his stated age. And another thing that I was reading, too, the guy who played the doctor, that Matthew Smith, that they were talking about, and he says he is 40 in the film. They said he actually was 40.
Yes,
So-
Orson Bean, who was a longtime character actor and frequent guest on The Tonight Show.
Mike, who did you have as most charismatic?
George C. Scott. I think it's pretty impressive to be able to come into a pretty big production. I think this is like kind of his big break. I don't think he'd really done much before this, but to be hired to play like the antagonistic attorney that's supposed to like really threaten the James Stewart and actually pull it off, to really feel like a viable threat, and just like the way he can pour the acid on, admittedly tips a little too far towards the end where he makes the big trial lawyer mistake, maybe a little overdone, but just even the sidebars and chambers with the judge and how they're kind of feeling each other out, and well, why don't we just file the appeal just for the sake of formality, and just how they size each other up. He's a presence right when he gets there, and you feel that like the entire way through. And I think that's super impressive for a young actor to go head to head with a living legend and hold their own.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of his performance the following year in The Hustler.
Mm-hmm.
Dad, who did you have?
I had Lee Remick, simply because she had to. The performance was good, and she looked great, and you believed every aspect of it. She had to come across as being both concerned about her husband. At the same time, she had to be just, how do I want to put it, provocative enough to believe that there might be more to the story than what she was telling. So she did a really great job of that, and she looked every part of the wife that every guy would be jealous of.
All right, let's move to best scene then.
Just a second. I want to just make one more mention, which is the judge.
Yes.
I just want to make, yes, the judge. All right. The judge, or if you are a student of American history, the very famous Army McCarthy hearings, one of the attorneys in those McCarthy hearings, and this is kind of what's perceived as the end of Joseph McCarthy and McCarthyism. That was the guy who was the judge, Attorney Walsh. Do you have no shame, Mr. Senator McCarthy?
Decency.
Decency. Yes. And the chiding that went on. And, this is a guy that had a pretty significant part for a non-lawyer, or for a non-actor. Just an attorney playing a judge. So I thought it was an interesting choice in casting.
Oh, definitely, but I don't think he makes any less of the film.
I was like dying to find a category to fit him into, just his level-headedness, kind of chipper attitude about like the shenanigans he's having to put up with and put down. Like he was a very welcome presence in the movie when things get very high energy, and he kind of is like your sensical through line. So I wanted to find a slot for him somewhere, and he got edged out everywhere, but I'm so glad he got mentioned.
He keeps a very calm, overseeing or presiding presence on the movie. There are certain judges, of course, that are going to be kind of nasty and whatever. He kind of matched the tone of the movie by not really making it too serious or taking himself too serious. Even he starts out with, I occasionally take my own naps, but I can be awoken gently with a nice point of law. So even from the opening jump, you're like, oh, well, this is kind of like the kindly grandfather who just is helping us oversee this big murder trial where everybody else is the aggravated parties.
Or when he says, I think I would like to hear that answer myself.
Let's move to best scene then. I have 5 nominees, and then I'll take some more if you guys have other ones, because I don't know if I got nearly enough in 5 scenes that for a 2.5-hour movie. There are a lot of small scenes in this that could easily have been nominated. But temporary insanity, which I'll cover is kind of the opening prelude where he's interviewing Ben Gazzara's character, Lieutenant Manion, and he's kind of got to figure his own way into his own defense. Then I have Smokescreen, which is kind of the opening prelude of the trial itself, and Jimmy Stewart just kind of throwing everything at the wall, trying to see what sticks and what he can actually make out of a defense, put up something that he can actually use. Then I have Cut into the Apple, which is kind of self-explanatory if you've seen the film. I have Baiting the Hook, also somewhat self-explanatory. And then I have finally the final confrontation or the climax of the film with Mary Plant. So, what did I miss?
I think you missed the scene with about the panties. I think it's classic. It talks about, whether they're going to be continuing to use this, and it brings about the whole discussion of the rape. It's kind of a turning point.
I would kind of generally include that into Cut into the Apple, but okay.
I have nothing else to dispute it. I mean, you got the primary ones as far as I'm concerned.
Myke, any other ones I missed?
I think one I'd throw in is the initial talk between Paul and Mary Plant just at the end, where the big line that people are not all good or not all bad. I think it not only does it have that great line, but that's pulling kind of one of the first times I noticed the idea that Paul Biegler in the courtroom is a character, and we are seeing maybe a more genuine guy, or is it a different version of the character who's suited for the situation? I think it was a really good moment for both those characters.
Okay, so out of these, what is the best scene of the film?
Baiting the Hook.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to say that.
I agree as well.
Boy, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of really good ones. The Cut into the Apple one sticks out to me, but if I had to go with one, I'd probably go Mary Plant. Because the climax of the film and building all up to that moment where you've basically tried to insinuate every woman in here has no right to come into court and make up any story that they want. They all have something out for the victim in this particular case, and it's undone by, no, he's my father.
The baiting the hook, let's just put it this way. When you have an opportunity as a lawyer, and Tom, you'll eventually have this moment where you set it up and you bring in the opposing side to a point where they fall for everything. I call it playing your Stradivarius, where the music is just perfect. Everything works. And they all of a sudden stand there and realize they have been had, is one of the most satisfying moments of a legal career. I've had several of those, and there are times if I'm having a bad day, I just go back and relive that moment and go, okay, yeah.
Dear Butch, no.
Yeah. Well, that's just one of my great stories. But, I mean, I had attempted homicide case, and I played it absolutely perfectly. And the guy walked away scot-free after 3 weeks at Mendota Mental Health on a not guilty by reason of insanity defense. And the prosecutor was so mad at me. So mad that I had to leave the courtroom and go into the jury room out in the other area and just sit there and laugh for about 15 minutes because I knew if I laughed while he was there, it was only going to be worse. But I had played it so perfectly. So to me, that's the best scene because I think it so epitomizes the lawyer and Biegler himself as being just a little bit smarter than everybody else there.
They're both great scenes, but I think one leads to the other because like the energetic build up and the explosion at the end of the Mary Plant scene is, you have to have bait the hook to set that up. But I think I give it that edge for kind of the more just the cunning, laying the brickwork. It was stressing me out watching the movie, thinking about doing the job and thinking about how the job is keeping your cool, seeing all the angles, not giving away that you're trying to figure out all the angles, and just all those like things that keep spinning in your head and try to play it cool. And so all the scenes in which you can very subtly see those machinations playing out a little less explosively, I think I give it just that edge. But it is really satisfying to watch George C. Scott just take this giant swing and fall flat on his face, and you can see it on his face the moment he just realizes, like, I lost.
All right, favorite scenes. I do have baiting the hook as my favorite scene. Again, for, if nothing else, the reaction shot from George C. Scott as, I think we've been hooked like the frog.
I really like the one where they're discussing, the underwear, the panties, and he has to ask her, what they looked like and everything about it, because it was so taboo to talk about those things. And it's so funny because they all look just a little uncomfortable. And I just find it funny.
My favorite scene is the, what was the undergarment referred to, that whole shot you talked about. There's this thing I love that old movies can do sometimes when they don't age well. And the movie has some of the stuff that we've talked about, that it does not place Mrs. Manion in this great spot, that they're coming after her like she asked for what happened. But this shot, to me, it's almost like they know they were being ridiculous, because it's this shot that is framed so over the top that it is these four men all lined up in a row to talk about a pair of panties. Like it's in on the joke, and it knows, like, we understand, like, these are probably not the people who should be making this decision, but let's kind of frame it in this funny way. And then just the whole back and forth on that is just great. So I'm going to give that my scene, because it's just a fun little piece of blocking and a good laugh, a good little piece of screenwriting.
Oh, definitely. And it does remind me a lot of like early Marx Brothers films in the way that it's kind of shot.
My favorite scene is temporary insanity. And I indicated earlier in the show why. I think I've mentioned this before. I have over 150 juries in my career, when I did a lot of trial work. At one point in time, I tried 1/3 of all of the criminal cases in my county in 1 year. I was doing things like I'd do a trial on Wednesday, then turn around and do another trial on Friday, and then do another trial the following Friday. Because I wanted to get experience doing trial work. So people from the public defender who needed a lawyer and they didn't make arrangements would come in at the last minute. And I used the same spiel because I'm trying to create a defense. And, one of the best ones I ever had was, where my client signed a confession, and I didn't ask her anything about the confession, whether it was true or not true, anything. So I could ask the deputy sheriff. I said, this handwriting is not hers, is it? No. Whose is it? Well, it's mine. I said, did you read it to her? Did you ensure that it was accurate? Well, no, she told me what it was, and I wrote it down, and then she signed it. I said, did you review it? I said, no. I said, is it possible you were inaccurate? And he goes, yeah, maybe I was. And so now the confession is now no longer a rock solid piece of evidence. And I'm hearing the audible from the prosecutor at this point in time. The jury was out for 3.5 hours on that one. So, but yes, so it just connected with me. So that's why it's my favorite.
Most indelible moment, for me, it's got to be the climax of the film, when you have a crestfallen George C. Scott slinking away slowly because he realized he's put his foot finally in the full bear trap and it has caught his foot. That's not only the most bombastic, but it's also the most memorable scene or moment of the movie for me.
What I've been mulling over in my head today, and what I think is my most indelible moment, not that yours isn't either, Tom, but is at the end of the film when they drive up and they're gone and he realizes that he's never going to get paid. And then it makes you wonder with that letter whether, he was really guilty, whether this whole thing, was all made up to cover up something else, and it just leaves you hanging.
Spoken by a lawyer's wife. For me, it's the Mary Pallant examination, and I've had a couple of those moments. I had one where it was a sexual assault. I kept saying that my client didn't do it, and I had evidence to that effect. I had the the victim saying that it didn't happen to my investigator. We get to the trial, and the prosecutor goes, "And you were in his apartment?" "Yes." "And then you were talking?" "Yes." And then he started putting himself into a position where he was flirting with you, correct? "Yes." "And then you had sex, correct?" "No." And then after that, and everybody in the courtroom, because the prosecutor's continuing on his examination, and I said, I look up, I remember going, "Stop. Your Honor, could I have the court reporter read that answer back?" I knew what the answer was, but of course I'm asking this so that the jury pays attention to what it was, which is she just testified that he never sexually assaulted her. And so at that moment in time, so that's why the Pallant thing, because you get in those situations in trial work where all of a sudden things fall apart and you just feel like the blood drains from your body.
I'm going to go with one of the quieter ones, and it's actually that scene I talked earlier, the kind of first sit down with Mary Pallant, where the big moment of like, one thing I've learned is people are not all good and not all bad. Kind of a simple line, but I think one that is a break from a lot of the really bombastic tricks. And the thing I kind of like about the moment is like, it did make me, at first I was kind of just warmed by it, like, oh, it's the real Paul Biegler, and then sitting with it thinking like, oh, what if it isn't? Like, he's still there on a mission. What if this is just a different tactic? And what that says about the character and his pursuit of getting what he wants. And that's just a moment I have been able to shake, and maybe just because it's one of these few moments you get out of the courtroom that it kind of stood out a little bit more to me. But I'm going to go with that one.
All right, so that looks like a great spot for our second break. We'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, as of this last month, all of our episodes are also now in video format. That's right, you can see my resting nerd face and all of Dana's famous okays in pristine high definition. So far, we have 13 different episodes now available to watch. Just head to youtube.com/@gmodepodcast, or I have the full video and audio feeds on our website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmodepodcast. Both of those are also available in the episode description of this episode, so check us out there, and if you do, please like the video or subscribe to us. We would really appreciate it. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Tito Jackson, 70. American Hall of Fame musician, member of the Jackson 5. Tommy Cash, 84. American country musician, 6 White Horses. Is the brother of Johnny Cash. Chad McQueen, 63. American actor, The Karate Kid, Martial Law, Red Line, the son of Steve McQueen.
Apparently, this was the worst week to be related to a celebrity.
Yeah.
Son of Steve McQueen, brother of Michael Jackson, and brother of Johnny Cash.
Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. But even so, we appreciate them all for their contributions to the arts, and we recognize them here with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Let's do our awkward transition to best, funniest lines. First one I have up, Claude Dancer. When I was overseas during the war, Your Honor, I learned a French word. I'm afraid that might be slightly suggestive. Most French words are.
I have one by Parnell. Did you give the lieutenant the well-known lecture? Biegler. If you mean did I coach him into a phony story, no. Parnell. Maybe you're too pure, Paul. Too pure for the natural impurities of the law.
I've thrown out a bunch already from Biegler. As a lawyer, I've had to learn that people aren't just good or just bad. People are many things.
Lieutenant Manion. How can a jury disregard what it already heard? Biegler. They can't, Lieutenant. They can't.
Judge Weaver. One judge is quite like another. The only differences may be in the state of their digestions or their proclivities for sleeping on the bench. For myself, I can digest pig iron. And, while I might appear to doze occasionally, you will find that I am easily awakened, particularly if shaken gently, by a good lawyer with a nice point of law.
Biegler. Look, Laura, believe me, I don't usually complain of an attractive jiggle, but just you save that jiggle for your husband to look at, if and when I get him out of jail.
Biegler, you're fired. Maida, you can't fire me until you pay me.
Biegler. Your Honor, I don't think I can dignify this creature with any more questions. I've used something like that multiple times.
Biegler again. The prosecution would like to separate the motive from the act. Well, that's like trying to take the core from an apple without breaking the skin.
Maida Rutledge. If this refrigerator gets any more fish in it, it will swim upstream and spawn all by itself.
Another one from Judge Weaver for me. A creature that cannot talk will be a welcome relief. Produce the dog.
Biegler. I'm just a country lawyer trying to do the best I can against this brilliant prosecutor from the big city of Lansing. I've used that too. Not quite, but similar.
The intent was the same. I'll use one that Dad already quoted, but Parnell. 12 people go off into a room. 12 different minds. 12 different hearts from 12 different walks of life. 12 sets of eyes, ears, shapes, and sizes. And these 12 people are asked to judge another human being as different from them as they are from each other. And in their judgment, they must become of one mind, unanimous. It's one of the miracles of man's disorganized soul that they can do it, and in most instances, do it right. Well, God bless juries.
Biegler. Mr. Paquette, what would you call a man with an insatiable penchant for women? Paquette. A what? Biegler. A penchant, a desire, taste, passion? Paquette. Well, a ladies' man, I guess, or maybe just a damn fool. Judge Weaver. Just answer the questions, Mr. Paquette. The attorneys will provide the wisecracks.
Last one I have is a Biegler. All right, the cat's out of the bag. It's fair game for me to chase it.
Parnell. Gin? I knew there was something wrong with that guy. I never met a gin drinker yet that you could trust.
I like gin. I don't get that.
That's why I drink bourbon.
I'm out. Mom, you got any left?
Yeah, this one, and I was looking for it because it struck me at the time during the movie, but it's Biegler talking to Manion, and Biegler says, she's a very pretty woman, your wife. Manion, a man gets used to the way his wife looks. Biegler, yeah, I can see that. I thought it was profound.
I'm out.
Was it profound, Dad?
So am I.
Any left, Ma?
No.
Okay. All right, let's move to the Stanley rubric. Legacy is up first, and for those who have not listened to the show prior to this episode, legacy is a measure of roughly the legacy of the movie for both the audience and the industry at large, the industry including critics and potentially podcasters like ourselves, who are part of the general media and creation of what movies are, versus the casual fans as well as the diehard cinephiles, and what is the actual legacy of this movie after the initial 5 years in which it was released. So let's roughly take a jog here from roughly 1964 until now. What is the legacy of this movie? Dad, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first this time. Okay. Firm and industry. I mean, it's on, all of the big lists of, courtroom dramas. By the way, AFI had its top 10. It was 7. Any guess as to the 6 before it?
Well, I know that To Kill a Mockingbird was number
1
or 2.
12 Angry Men.
12 Angry Men. The Verdict, I'm pretty sure, is ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
Few Good Men, I think, is ahead of it.
A Few Good Men, I think, was ahead of it.
Correct.
What's 3?
Yep.
Witness for the Prosecution is in there somewhere.
It's not ahead of it.
Just above it. And 3 is the one that I have a problem with, which, having just watched it again for the first time since it was released in theaters, it shouldn't be above this.
Kramer versus Kramer?
Yep.
I just never really considered that a courtroom movie, but okay.
The end of it is a courtroom issue, and it's on a custody and questioning of the parents and all that. Yes, but it's not the same, and I just find it difficult to put it above most of the rest of these films. Anyway, from an industry point of view, I have a 4. Okay, but the public, I mean, unless you're a cinemaphile, this is not a film that people are very familiar with. Most people have never heard of it, even less have even seen of it or seen it. So I have to give it a 1. So I have a 5 overall, just simply because it's a great film. I wish people would watch it, but they haven't. Instead, they watch garbage like the series of Presumed Innocent, which is just absolute balderdash.
Or what is it, Love Island? Some reality trash?
Yeah, well, at least Presumed Innocent is supposed to be a courtroom drama, but there's nothing about it that's believable.
Oh, well, as long as we want to throw in barely believable courtroom drama TV shows. How about Suits?
I had to stop watching it after about that first half season because I kept going, there's so many ways that these people would be disbarred.
Well, the entire premise of the show can easily be undone. If anyone wants to ever ask how that show could very easily have solved its major issue that it starts with, it's very simple. But anyway, I digress. So while I have some disagreements with how you arrived at your score, I am not too different from where you're at. It does appear on a few of these so-called lists. For the most part, it was nominated for things. The only one where it actually made the list was the 10 top 10. So I don't know if that's really a point in its favor. This is not like one of the first movies that automatically comes up as a great classic or even a Jimmy Stewart role where like it's quintessential or essential Jimmy Stewart. So from that standpoint, I don't think that the industry quite has the level of respect for this that maybe I do, where it's kind of a somewhat of a personal favorite given the way that the legalese kind of plays out. With that, I only have that at about a 3.5 or so. There's nobody else from this that you could easily say, oh, well, that person's in it, other than kind of Jimmy Stewart and to a degree, George C. Scott. But how many people are able to identify George C. Scott in a way that we are? So again, this is kind of in a cinephile range. And then I know that I've criticized our informal poll that we do in the office staff meetings as to whether or not something is like well known or not. But the fact that we had 2 out of like 25 people raise their hand that they'd heard of the movie, and I think 1 had seen it, does at least speak to the fact that this is not something that a lot of people know. This is a movie that I really enjoy, that I'd love to introduce to other people. In fact, I would love at some point to like have this as an office watch along when we just need a day or an afternoon. It's like a rainy type of Friday and you just want to screw around and everybody's tired from the week. It would be something easy to put on. But it's just not that movie for most people. I think for most people, they have other courtroom dramas ahead of it that they find a little bit more engaging, that are a little more energetic. Stuff with Tom Cruise in it, that type of thing. So from that standpoint, I can only give it, I kind of sat at roughly a 2. Part of my reasoning on that is that, again, if I go back to my own kind of rubric scoring, this is only a film that's going to be seen by maybe about half of the film nerd community. That's what I have defined as a 2. So I have a 5.5.
So I have this on industry side. I'm going to go 3.5 for most of the reasons that have already been stated. I think the movie is well received, but the point you made, it makes a lot of lists now, but you do have to do some digging. You do need like an AFI 10 top 10 or a 1001 movies book or, this Criterion collector. So the industry, they didn't give it really any awards. It's revered, but it also didn't get tons of time in the spotlight. It's pretty easily swept aside in favor of other James Stewart projects. Otto Preminger is respected, but not necessarily a household director name. But I do think that they do still revere it. So I'll go 3.5 for industry. I'll go 2.5 for audience for the aforementioned reasons about the list. I'm gonna bump it up that extra half point though, because of the folks I've recommended it to, or the folks who've never heard of it but seen it, I get positive feedback every time that people do enjoy the movie once they've seen it. It's just one that isn't necessarily on people's radar, but I think it is a good word of mouth movie that, the select few who know it do pass along pretty positive word of mouth. So I'll go 2.5 audience, 3.5 industry for a total of 6.
Your last, Ma.
I know. And I never do the industry thing. I just give it a score as one whole score. I have a 5 here. I'm right in the middle of the road. And for all of the same reasons that you did, it's such a shame that more people haven't seen this film. And while we were watching it, my mother also watched it. You were talking about word of mouth, Myke. So this evening, my parents were both going to be watching the movie because my mom enjoyed it so much. She wanted to see it again and introduced it to my father. So I think in the context that it is an enjoyable film and it's easy to tell somebody, oh, you really have to watch this movie, it does have a legacy factor. If we could get the word out there, it might be more on the lists that you're talking about because it's well done. It's well scripted. It has great actors in it. There's just nothing not to like about this movie, and why it's not up higher on your list, I don't know.
All right, so that puts us at a 5.38 average between the 4 of us. Let's move to impact and significance. I will lead off here. So I kind of judge this very similarly to legacy. In fact, this category for the most part is usually defined as basically legacy, but in the first 5 years in which it was out. So roughly 1959 to 1964. I think that this was somewhat seen, but given the fact that, again, it's very difficult to determine what box office numbers were like before like the early 70s, maybe even the late 60s, you might have some decent reporting numbers. $8 million, though, by at least a decent estimate in the domestic box office, wouldn't have even had it in the top 10. And even though there are some decent movies that are outside of the top 10 in overall gross, like Rio Bravo, which is a favorite on our show and that we covered way back in season 1, is also an audience favorite, apparently. That didn't make the top 10 either. So while it's not the be-all, end-all, I don't think that this movie was everywhere. If you're to give it any credit, it is that it got 7 nominations, even though it wasn't one of the top grossing films of that particular year, when the Oscars was much more concerned with what were the reactions, not only from the critics, but the audience as well. It was kind of a mesh up until maybe about, I would say maybe the 90s, early 2000s, where the critic versus audience split really started. Up until that point, you really did, for the most part, have a lot of crossover with the film that would eventually win, was widely accepted by audiences and critics alike. This is one where the critics liked it, but not a lot of people saw it enough for it to garner the top prize in the way that Ben-Hur did. Sorry, Mike. But, it still was a favorite. Like, I don't see that anybody really had any issues with it. It just wasn't promoted to the point where it was the top movie in that particular year for most people. So ultimately, I come down at a 4 for the industry. Again, it has good critic reviews. It has a industry-wide recognition. Just not that they're all beating the table for this to be their movie. This is their champion. They eventually picked Ben-Hur that particular year. That was number 1 at the box office. And I go with a 2.5 for the public, where they turned out, but it wasn't like in droves. So I have a 6.5.
Nominated for a boatload of Academy Awards. The public liked the film. It finished about 17th or 18th in box office, according to most of the studies. So, from what was spent on the film, it made a profits, and the public overall enjoyed it. It didn't get the wide play that other films did. So, for the industry, I had a 4.5. For the public, I had a 3. Actually, yeah, I'll stick at my 3. So, I'm 7.5 overall.
All right. You let Mike go first last time, Mom, so I'll let you go first here.
Okay. Well, I am not one to know all kinds of history and about film in and of itself. That's not my thing. As far as impact and significance, I'm not sure how many courtroom dramas there were at the time. I think there is some significance in the fact that it was so close to what Dana says, it is really like. So it was realistic in nature, that it may have spawned other directors to look at doing more courtroom type scenes in their films. But given the knowledge that it wasn't a big hit, I think that the impact was kind of low outside of that factor. So I gave it a 6.
Just for your clarification, 57 was 12 Angry Men. 58 was Witness for the Prosecution. And then this was
Witness
59.
for the Prosecution was also 57. Because they were both up in the same year for Best Picture.
Okay. I have the list from the AFI, and they have Witness for the Prosecution as 58. But okay.
Even so, To Kill a Mockingbird is 62. So this was a peak era for serious courtroom movies.
7 Oscar noms is nothing to sneeze at. So there was definitely some impact. Definitely the controversy surrounded it. If a parent is going to pull out a full page ad, decrying their son's choice of movie, and their son also happens to be one of the biggest movie stars in the world, to me that screams we're leaving a big impact. So I think I'm going to go 4 for industry. I want to bump that to 4.5, but I'm looking at the nominees. I'm really not so certain that if the Academy had a do-over, I'm not convinced they wouldn't just give it to Ben-Hur all over again. So I think a 4 for them. For audience, same points. They showed up. They didn't beat down the door. So I'm going to go 3.5 on audience. So 7.5 total for me.
So that's a 6.88 average between the 4 of us. Novelty. Now, this is a category that I've recently started really splitting between originality as well as the execution of the concept in the idea. So with this, I would say that given that we just mentioned that it was kind of in a peak era for courtroom dramas, many of the ones that are in the top 10 are all from about this rough 10-year period of courtroom movies. I think that this kind of defined the courtroom genre for probably 2 decades or so. And given that they were all trying to find different ways to present different courtroom movies, I don't know that this is particularly all that original. The one place where I will give it some points is its location and setting, that it was kind of out of the set work and it was on location a bit. It's also based on a actual story, and as opposed to Witness for the Prosecution, which I find to be a very good movie, it is based on a real case. So the legal reference point is a lot more accurate than I can really say for a movie such as that. So with that, I'm going to go for a 4 on the originality of the idea. On an execution standpoint, I will also go a 4. I do think this is a highly executed movie. We've talked about the script. We've talked about the cinematography. We haven't really discussed the music at all, but I don't find that Ellington's music detracts from the film in any way. And I would say in some spots enhances it. It's a little getting used to for a serious courtroom movie to have this like jazzy score backing it for a while. But other than that, I think this is a well-executed movie. Is it one of the supremely well-executed movies? No, I do think it has a few spots where you could maybe critique it here or there. So I also have a 4 on that side. I have an 8. Myke, do you want to take a shot here?
So going originality, I think I'm going to join you on the 4, especially pushing the boundaries on, what's quote-unquote appropriate language. This all seems very quaint now, but that seems very novel, especially for its time. And bringing, this maybe dips into execution a bit too, but to put the stamp on the courtroom drama movie, less in terms about tackling social issues, which the movie still does, but it's much more about the machinations of the system and how to play that, sometimes embellishing it with some dramatic flair. I think that angle is a really cool idea. So I'll go a 4 on that, and then I'll go 4 on execution for most of the points I said about making Preminger my star performance of the movie.
So you also have an 8. Ma, what did you have down?
I have a 7. So, like you, I think that the location, putting it in a small town with the small town lawyer, the scenery in the courtroom where how they're filming it, especially the Mary Pallant where he gets like right in her face just after there was a motion to have him move out of the way because he was blocking Biegler or his view from her, and yet he still continues to stand in front of her and where Biegler can't see her. But when it gets right up in and close, and that where you can almost feel the tension in the room, and then the wide so that we can see his reaction and everything. I thought that was quite unique for a courtroom type of thing. So I gave it a 7.
There were a lot of films on courtrooms. I do think that this is by far the most accurate portrayal of a trial that I have seen in film. And the fact that it was based on a real trial located in a relatively isolated location, which is about 90% of America. The movies all put trials in these big cities and whatever. But the real interesting cases are always these cases that pertain to small locations out of the way because you have to deal with what situations occur, what the evidence is, what police officers do, how the evidence is retained, how it's protected, etc. So I have to give it points up for execution, or as far as the story itself. As far as execution, it's as a film, it's phenomenal. The story aspect, the scenes, the courtroom drama. I stopped to think about that today while I was evaluating this. How he went about filming that, because he has camera from the left side. There's a camera where the jury box would be. There's a camera from where the witness box would be. There's a camera from where the bailiff was sitting. There's a camera that would show from where the jury or from the gallery was. How you go about doing that without completely tearing apart the set over and over and over again. So I think it's a phenomenally well done and well crafted film directorially. Overall, I give it a 7.5 combining those two aspects.
So that's a 7.63 average between the four of us. Let's move to classicness. Dad, why don't you lead us off?
Generally, I start with classicness at a 7, and I go up or down. So let's go to the obvious, which is no way in hell are you going to have attorneys, implying that she's asking to be raped because of what she's wearing. The sex or the rape shield law is broad, and it is encompassing, and it limits your ability to cross-examine on such situations, as well it should. So I have to give it at least 2 points down for that. Now, that puts me at a 6. But I'm going to go the other direction, which is...
Hold on, that puts you at a 5.
Excuse me, a 5. Now I'm going to go the other direction. You could have this movie released today, and it would still adequately show how a trial works. The judge, the witnesses, the prosecution, the special prosecutor, the defense, every part of this case could be done today, and it wouldn't have to be changed one bit in order to be prevalent and done accurately as a trial today. Not one bit. So I have to give it points, significant points up, because this was not only accurate, it was prescient of where what trials were and where they were likely to be in the future. So I went back up to an 8 based on that.
So I think that the film is still relevant. So as far as classicness is concerned, I think that it holds up outside of the time period where you couldn't say certain things, and obviously what Dad pointed out with the whole rape, if you're going to get technical about it. But I still think that the film, you could take that film, like Dad said, and put it in today's time period with a little bit different, maybe fact pattern, and include things that you couldn't even include then that might have been questionable, and still come out with a phenomenal film. So I just think it holds up altogether, despite those few minor areas. So I have an 8.
All right. As for me, if we're starting at a 7 to begin with, one of the factors that I often attribute to classicness is timelessness. And I do think that this has an element of that. And given its age, how well it has aged into the future on some topics that we're still exploring. I think Dad's point is well made on this subject, even though I don't think he gave the points for the same reasons. I would probably give this about a 2 for timelessness on aging this up. The points where I would have, maybe if it's a subtraction a little bit, I would maybe have a half point down for the nature of the quaintness. Like, the panties discussion is funny in retrospect because that doesn't bother us anymore. At the time, it was controversial, but now it's just kind of like, oh, ha. The judge has to make a special reference that nobody's to giggle or laugh at the mention of the word, when literally nobody in the audience is like, well, that's really funny. It might be to an 11-year-old boy, but that's about your only audience for giggles for the word panties anymore. Anyway, the only other one, I think Dad is a little oversensitive with the rape shield point of view, because it's kind of a minor point of the movie, and it's more insinuated than just outright a part of their prosecution that she might be asking for it. They're trying to dismiss that the rape even happened. So it's a minor part of the overall prosecution as opposed to anything that's like a direct strategy. So I don't take that as much credence. So I'd be tempted to go with a 10, except for those 2 minor points. So I have a 9.
I'm also joining the 8 bandwagon. In terms of points, kind of the same points, that there's this small thread in the movie where it does take Mrs. Manion out of the equation, and that does seem like insensitive in a case that is largely, the defense is based on a sexual assault she endured. Your point, Tom, that line where the audience has a chuckle and Judge Weaver says, okay, you've had your laugh, but no more smiles. There's nothing funny about a pair of panties that factors into the death of one man and the possible incarceration of another. And I said out loud, you're missing a key player in that. How about the woman who was attacked? It's a very small, part of the movie. Like you said, that's not a core thing it hinges on. So I don't dock it too much. I think also just in terms of sheer star power, I kind of throw that in this category that, we've got a lot of classic Hollywood talent with Preminger directing, Jimmy Stewart starring, George C. Scott, all this kind of adds to it. It's not a comedy, but I appreciate the levity. And I think a lot of the jokes did give me a giggle, or even the moments where, the lawyers get each other. So I don't think it was it's as endearing as a lot of the other stuff built around this era. I don't think it's quite on the level of a 12 Angry Men. It's a little underseen, but I think it retains its classicness. I think it retains a bit of the timeliness as well, because it's so much about the machinations of a trial, and you as an audience member get sucked in that because, again, Preminger is putting us in the jury box. So I'm going to give it an 8.
So that's an 8.25 average between the four of us. Rewatchability. Ma, let's start with you. This was a first viewing
10.
for you. 10?
Mm-hmm. I would definitely be watching it again.
Cool. Dad?
Usually, if it's on my list of, yes, I'll rewatch it, and I keep it on a regular feed type of thing, is a 7. Actually, I originally put 7, and as the days progressed, I'm going to go to the 7.5. This is a film that, I just caught myself the other day, Dial M for Murder, which, I just put it on for no reason. I was having a kind of a, bad day, or a day that I, needed to just have something to distract me a bit as I'm doing paperwork, and I put it on. This is going to be right in that vicinity. Am I going to watch it more than every, year? No, but I think about every year would be about right. So 7.5.
I think I'm going to go a 7, maybe. Well, let me, shout out to the incomparable Kieran B. I'll use his thing. So in terms of how likely to put it on my own volition, I'm maybe on a 3.5. I do love the movie. It is nearly 3 hours, and that is a tight 3 hours, a fast 3 hours, but is 3 hours nonetheless, which is getting harder and harder for me to block out. So I think I'm going to stick 3.5 there, but I'm going to go up to a 4 for if it's on somewhere, am I going to leave it on? Absolutely. I cannot get dropped into the middle of one of these courtroom scenes and not just get sucked into it. So I'll go 7.5.
For me, on my own personal rubric of how I kind of decide this on our Kieran B test, to also use that, it's getting pretty close to kind of like a sick movie for me. I really enjoyed the film. Again, it's the third time I've seen it this year, and it really hasn't waned on me at all for being the third time already this year. So I'm not ready to quite go that high that I would give it a 5, but it's kind of in a 4.5 range for me, where once a year, maybe a little bit more often than that, I might put this on. It could be a very easy comfort film for me because it's got that levity to it that it makes it easily digestible. Now, as far as leaving it on, am I going to go out of my way? Am I going to really stop whatever I'm doing in order to watch this? Probably not. It's somewhere between I'm watching a few scenes and I'm watching maybe 10, 15 minutes of it. But it's not something that I'm making a plan to go back to, or making sure that I'm going to fit this in again, just because I kind of know it so well. So I have about a 3.5 on that. I have an 8 overall. So again, on this one, we have an 8.25 average between the four of us. Now, for audience score on this one, we had an 84% for Google users and a 91% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.75. So, to repeat the categories, for Legacy, we have a 5.38. For Impact and Significance, we have a 6.88. For Novelty, we have a 7.63. For Classicness, an 8.25. And Rewatchability, an 8.25. Finally, for audience score, we had an 8.75 for a final total of 45.14. And currently placing it on our list between Back to the Future and Gaslight.
Okay.
For number 125. As usual, if you have any problems with any of our scoring, please write us at greatestalltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or you can find us on any of our socials at Gmote Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Letterboxd, and YouTube. Or you can find us on RonnieDuncanStudios.com/Gmote Podcast. That's GMOAT. Remaining questions for this one. Where do the Manions go?
Anyone else? It doesn't matter. As part of the bond records, you'll have his serial number from the military. And if you file suit in Marquette County or whatever county it was, it would have been Marquette County, Michigan. You have the Soldiers and Sailors Act in order to obtain service. And the United States military will actually serve him with your paperwork for the services you provided. So he would have been well protected.
That was a lingering question I had, was like, he really nonchalantly kisses off like the only paycheck he had coming in. So I was like, does he just feel confident he's going to be able to track him down, or is he really just kissing this off as a lark?
Yes and no, but yes, you can track him down. Whether you're going to be able to collect or not, okay, but the military really does not like litigation for debt. It would directly impact his service record.
So does that make the ending any easier for you, Mom?
No, because my question is still, were they making up stories to cover up something else, or was she really raped?
Okay. Was Manion temporarily insane?
No.
I don't know. Maybe. You don't
Spoken
know.
like a defense attorney.
You don't know. And it's not your job to make that
yes,
determination.
It is. We've already pointed out that we're the jury in this situation, so we're supposed to make a determination.
The jury
Would you find
did.
him guilty or not?
The jury did, and they said not guilty.
Yes, the jury in the movie. But you as a juror member.
I don't know.
That's not good enough.
Yeah,
you can't
it
be
is.
a hung jury. No.
Okay.
I'm going to expect an answer, counselor.
I represented hundreds of defendants, and never did I have a trial where that I thought my client was guilty and he got off from the jury, because I never ask. It's not my responsibility.
Okay, you thought he was temporarily insane and he should have been acquitted. Okay, thank you.
Well, based on the evidence and
yes,
jury
that's all you have.
Yes.
Okay. Good Lord. Golly. How successful is Biegler's firm after the case? Now, I think in the case of the actual attorney, he ends up on the Michigan Supreme Court after the movie.
No, before.
Is it before? Okay.
Yeah, it was actually before.
Yeah, I think based on that, depending on what kind of publicity they got, he probably did very well for himself after the fact.
Define success. Are you paying
well, at least
your
he
bills?
Can pay his secretary.
That's
Can you keep the light? Can you keep the lights on? Can you buy enough supplies to tie flies for fishing? Can you pay your secretary? Hey, you're a success.
That was honestly all I cared about. I was like, does Maida finally get paid? Because, Biegler, like in Par, like they're fine. They're just doing it for the love of the game. They can fish, like they don't need it. But that woman needs to be paid. She's put up with too much.
We'd have a few employees who would have walked out without a paycheck.
Any remaining questions for any of you?
I want to know if Quinnell actually gave Laura the black eye or whether her husband gave her the black eye when she came home.
I'm thinking it was the lieutenant. I think he gets fired up way too easy on a clearly fabricated story when he really should know damn well better. I think he's too hot-headed. I think he's the one who did it.
I don't know. I kind of default to the position that I kind of want to believe the story and believe Paul and go with their side, but I suppose you can make multiple readings.
And ultimately, is Biegler going to be the great criminal defense attorney? I'm sure he will for, the guy who allegedly hit his wife or the person who poached some fish out of the lake. I mean, how many murder cases are you going to have in that location? I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He made the most of it. He probably, if you use the definition of, is he making a success financially? Probably. But there are a lot of lawyers in small towns who fit within the community and become more or less quasi-public servants.
I have one more. How bad does Dancer get chewed out when he gets back to Lansing? Really?
Exactly. Yeah, you stuck your foot in your mouth there.
Yeah. I don't know if they get chewed out per se, but losing a high-profile case is not a feather in your cap.
Losing a high-profile case to a guy from the sticks, that's the point that gets me, is there's going to be so much ego attached to it, not only for him, but everybody that's looking at him. You lost to that guy? Really? Who's probably had maybe one murder case ever? Well, I want to thank our guests for being on with us. Just a reminder, Ma, is there anything that you'd like to promote or put yourself out publicly for? Anything on social media that people would like to find you? Like pictures of cinnamon rolls or anything?
Yeah, you might find those on my Facebook page. Yeah.
And Mike, where can we find you?
Cinemusts, just anywhere you find podcasts. Also follow us on Twitter or Instagram, or mainly on Twitter, but that is where we rely on the audience to make the final say on whether the movies we cover make the list of must-see movies or if they're a little more in lower tier. So always glad to get votes, comments, and thoughts on that. Like I said, we're on a sporadic release schedule. Just kind of depends on when the free time opens up. But like I mentioned at the top, release soon on essential non-Disney animated movies and regular episodes being delivered. Something horror-centric in October. November, December, you'll be seeing Inside Llewyn Davis with 1001 by 1's Joey R. And Revisionist Almanac's own Andrew Corns will be joining us for Children of Men before the year is out.
Excellent. Well, we are out of time for this week, so we'll have to save remaining thoughts. But thank you very much to everybody out there. You have been great. Thank you for listening. The worst part of having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't. Next week, for our 230th episode, we welcome new guest Jalen Salah Salman of In Session Film to discuss a controversial comic book film, Joker from 2019. Written and directed by Todd Phillips, with Scott Silver. Music by Hildur Guthnadottir, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Robert De Niro, and Zazie Beetz. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in on our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on our YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMotePodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.